The moment of absolute public humiliation. Arrogant Richard Davenport parades his new, younger wife in front of his ex, Danielle, mocking her humble life and reveling in his victory. He believes she was a failure destined for obscurity. But before he can even finish his cruel speech, a lawyer interrupts. An envelope is opened, and in a matter of minutes, the woman Richard discarded as a bookstore clerk inherits a massive $47 billion empire. This is the true story of Danielle Caroline, where karmic justice isn't slow. It's instantaneous and worth billions. Get ready for a power shift that proves the ultimate revenge is owning the world your ex-husband tried to dominate. The scent of old paper and freshly brewed coffee was the only comfort Danielle Caroline had left. It clung to her clothes, her hair, a constant reminder of the quiet, contained world she now inhabited. The Gilded Page, a quaint bookstore cafe nestled in a less fashionable corner of Greenwich Village, was her sanctuary and her prison. 3 years ago, she had been Mrs. Danielle Davenport, mistress of a sprawling Upper East Side penthouse, a silent partner in her husband Richard's meteoric rise. Now she was just Danielle, the woman who refilled sugar shakers and knew exactly which blend of tea a customer wanted just by the weary look in their eyes. The divorce had been brutal and swift. Richard, with his team of ruthless Prescott and Lowell attorneys, had painted her as an unsupportive, ambitionless wife. He'd argued that his company, Davenport Innovations, was built from his genius alone. He conveniently forgot the late nights she'd spent editing his business plans, the family inheritance she'd invested in his first prototype, the social events she'd orchestrated to win over his key investors. In the end, the prenuptial agreement she'd signed in a haze of love held firm. She was left with a fraction of what she'd put in and a restraining order preventing her from claiming any part of his future success. He'd called it a clean break. She called it annihilation. Life had shrunk to the dimensions of her tiny, rent-controlled apartment in the four walls of the bookstore. She found a strange peace in the routine, in the simple act of placing a book in a customer's hands. She had learned to live with the ghost of her former life, the phantom limb of wealth and status that ached whenever she saw a sleek black car glide past, or a woman on the street wearing the kind of coat she used to buy without a second thought. The bell above the door chimed, a cheerful, tinkling sound that was entirely at odds with the figures who stepped inside. Danielle's heart didn't just drop, it plummeted, a cold, heavy stone in her chest. Richard Davenport stood there, broad-shouldered in a custom-tailored Xenia suit that probably cost more than her entire year's salary. And clinging to his arm, like a glittering parasite, was Tiffany. Tiffany was everything Danielle was not. She was a decade younger, with impossibly long blonde hair, a surgically perfected nose, and a blindingly white smile. She was wearing a crimson dress that hugged her body like a second skin, and a diamond necklace that glittered maliciously under the warm, gentle lights of the bookstore. It was the necklace Richard had promised Danielle for their 10th anniversary, an anniversary they never reached. "Danielle, darling," Richard boomed, his voice oozing a theatrical sort of pity. The few customers browsing the shelves turned to look. "I was just showing Tiffany around the old neighborhoods. You know, a little tour of my humble beginnings." His eyes swept over the cafe, a smirk playing on his lips as he took in the worn wooden floors, the mismatched chairs, the quiet dignity of the place. He was performing, and she was the unwilling prop in his one-act play of triumph. Tiffany's gaze was even more insulting. It was a slow, deliberate scan, from Danielle's sensible shoes to her faded apron, to the stray wisp of brown hair that had escaped her simple bun. "Oh, this is where you work?" Tiffany's voice was a high, breathy whisper, laced with manufactured sweetness. "It's quaint, so authentic." The word authentic was delivered as if it were a synonym for filthy. Danielle's hands gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles turning white. She refused to give them the satisfaction of her anger or her tears. She summoned every ounce of grace she had left and offered a tight, professional smile. "Richard, Tiffany, what can I get for you? A coffee? Or are you just here to browse?" "Oh, we don't have time for coffee," Richard said, patting Tiffany's hand. "We have reservations at Per Se. A little celebration." He leaned in conspiratorially, his expensive cologne an assault on her senses. Davenport Innovations just closed the Kestrel deal, a 9-figure contract. Our stock is going to soar. He paused, letting the weight of the statement land. I just wanted you to be one of the first to know. After all, you were there for the lean years. It's only fair you get to see what the prosperous ones look like. It was a deliberate, calculated cruelty. Every word was a poisoned dart, designed to remind her of what she had lost, what he had become without her. Tiffany, sensing her cue, held up her left hand, flashing an engagement ring so large it looked like a shard of ice. And we're celebrating this too, she chirped. Richard insisted on upgrading my old one after the deal went through. He's just so generous. Danielle felt the floor tilt beneath her. The air was thick, suffocating. She could feel the eyes of her regulars, Mr. Henderson in the history section, Mrs. Gable by the poetry, their faces a mixture of pity and discomfort. Her humiliation was a public spectacle. Congratulations, Danielle managed to say, her voice a dry rasp. I wish you both the best. Do you? Richard challenged, his smile widening. He was enjoying this, feeding off her pain. It's funny how things work out. Some people are just meant for bigger things. And some, his eyes flickered around the bookstore again, are meant for this. He was about to say more. He opened his mouth, ready to deliver the final crushing blow, but the bell above the door chimed again. An older gentleman stepped inside. He was the antithesis of Richard. He wore a simple, impeccably tailored but understated gray suit. His silver hair was neatly combed, and he had kind, intelligent eyes behind a pair of wire-rimmed glasses. He held a leather briefcase and moved with a quiet, purposeful authority that made Richard's brash confidence look cheap and hollow. The man's eyes scanned the room, bypassing Richard and Tiffany entirely, and settled on Danielle. He walked directly to the counter. Pardon the interruption, he said, his voice calm and resonant. Are you Ms. Danielle Rose Caroline, formerly Danielle Davenport? Danielle blinked, startled by the formality. Yes, that's me. Richard, annoyed at being upstage, scoffed loudly. She's a little busy right now, pal. Whatever you're selling, she can't afford it. The man in the gray suit didn't even glance at Richard. He placed his briefcase on the counter and opened it with 2 precise clicks. My name is Benjamin Abernathy. I'm a senior partner at Sterling, Albright & Cole. I am the executor of the estate of the late Mr. Arthur Sterling. Danielle frowned. The name sounded vaguely familiar, a whisper from her childhood. Sterling? I think he was my grandmother's brother, my great-uncle. I never met him. I heard he was a recluse. That is correct, Mr. Abernathy said, his expression softening with a hint of sympathy. I'm sorry to be the one to inform you, but Mr. Sterling passed away 2 days ago. He was 94 years old. He paused, then slid a thick vellum document across the counter. And he has named you, Miss Caroline, as the sole heir to his entire estate. Richard burst out laughing, a loud, braying sound that filled the small bookstore. Her? Heir to what? A collection of stamps and a dusty old house in the middle of nowhere? Don't waste our time. Mr. Abernathy finally turned his gaze to Richard. His calm demeanor didn't change, but his eyes held a sudden Arctic chill. Mr. Davenport, is it? You run Davenport Innovations, I believe? The tech startup focusing on data compression algorithms? Richard preened. The one and only. We just landed the Kestrel deal. Yes, I saw that, Mr. Abernathy said dryly. A commendable mid-cap achievement. He then turned back to Danielle, his voice regaining its warmth. Ms. Caroline, your great-uncle was not a stamp collector. Arthur Sterling was the founder, chairman, and sole shareholder of Sterling Holdings. A silence fell over the bookstore. It was so profound that Danielle could hear the hum of the refrigerator behind the counter. Davenport Innovations, a mid-cap achievement, Sterling Holdings. The name was everywhere, yet nowhere. It wasn't a flashy brand, but a colossal, silent titan of industry. They owned shipping lines, pharmaceutical research labs, vast swaths of commercial real estate in every major city, and a controlling interest in dozens of tech firms, including, as Danielle suddenly recalled from a business journal she'd once read, the primary venture capital firm that funded the Kestrel Corporation. Tiffany's smile had frozen on her face. Richard's smug expression slowly dissolved, replaced by a slack-jawed confusion. Mr. Abernathy continued, his voice steady and clear, a lighthouse in the fog of Danielle's disbelief. The estate, Miss Caroline, includes the entirety of Sterling Holdings, its global assets, subsidiary companies, and liquid capital. A preliminary valuation places the net worth of the empire you have just inherited at approximately $47 billion. $47 billion. The number didn't compute. It was an abstract concept, a string of zeros that had no connection to the reality of her $5 an hour plus tips existence. Danielle stared at Mr. Abernathy, then at the document on the counter, its elegant script a language from another universe. Her mind was a maelstrom of shock, a deafening white noise that drowned out everything else. It was Richard who broke the spell. His laugh was gone, replaced by a strangled gasp. That's impossible. That's a lie. Arthur Sterling was a myth, a boogeyman. He hasn't been seen in public for 30 years. His preference for privacy did not negate his existence or his business acumen, Mr. Davenport. Abernathy replied coolly, not bothering to look at him. His entire focus was on Danielle, his gaze steady and reassuring. Miss Caroline, I know this is a profound shock. We can discuss the details somewhere more private. No! Richard's voice was sharp, desperate. If he was her great uncle, then I was her husband for 12 years. I'm entitled to— You are entitled to nothing, Mr. Abernathy cut in, his voice like the crack of a whip. Mr. Sterling's will is ironclad. It was drafted by myself and updated 6 months ago. It explicitly names Danielle Rose Caroline as his sole beneficiary. It also contains a specific clause on page 4, subsection C, which I can read aloud if you wish, permanently disinheriting any spouse, ex-spouse, or partner who is determined by the executor, that is, myself, to have caused her emotional or financial distress. I believe your divorce proceedings would more than satisfy that condition. Every drop of color drained from Richard's face. He looked as if Abernathy had physically struck him. Tiffany, ever the opportunist, took a small, almost imperceptible step away from Richard, her perfectly manicured hand detaching from his arm. Her eyes, wide and calculating, were fixed on Danielle. Danielle's legs felt weak. She gripped the counter to steady herself. Why me? She whispered, the question directed at the kind-faced lawyer. I never knew him. He never sent a card, a letter, nothing. Arthur was a complicated man, Abernathy said gently. He never forgave your grandmother for leaving the family to marry a man he deemed beneath her. He was proud, stubborn, but he never stopped watching. He received monthly reports on you, your entire life. He knew about your grades in school, your degree in art history and business administration, your marriage. He paused, his eyes flicking towards Richard with disdain. And he knew about your divorce. He saw what Mr. Davenport did. In his own words, written in a letter he left for you, he said, "The Davenports of this world build their pathetic little hills and call them mountains. The Sterlings own the tectonic plates." The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of the statement was so absolute it was almost beautiful. It was a power Danielle couldn't even begin to comprehend. He also wrote, Abernathy continued, pulling a simple cream-colored envelope from his briefcase, that he saw in you the same quiet strength and integrity his sister, your grandmother, possessed. He believed you had been undervalued and discarded. He considered this inheritance not a gift, but a restoration. He handed the envelope to Danielle. Her name was written on the front in a strong, spidery script. Her fingers trembled as she took it. Abernathy then turned his attention to the rest of the bookstore. I apologize for the intrusion, he announced to the gawking customers. As of this moment, Miss Caroline is the owner of this building and, in fact, the entire city block. As her first act of business, she is closing the store for the day. Please feel free to take any book you wish as a complimentary gift for the inconvenience. A murmur of disbelief and excitement rippled through the small crowd. Mr. Henderson looked like he might faint with joy. Mrs. Gable clutched a book of sonnets to her chest, her eyes wide. Richard was sputtering, his face a mottled mask of fury and envy. You can't do this! This is Danielle! He turned to her, his tone shifting from outrage to a desperate, wheedling plea. Danielle, baby, think about what you're doing. You don't know anything about running a company like that. It'll eat you alive. You need me. We can reconcile. We can tear up that divorce decree. This is our second chance. The absurdity of it was so stark, so pathetic, that a laugh bubbled up inside Danielle's chest. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was a raw, broken, and utterly cathartic sound. Our second chance, Richard. You just stood here 5 minutes ago telling me I was meant for this, she gestured around the bookstore, while you were meant for bigger things. You brought your fiancé to my place of work to flaunt your success and my failure. And now, because the numbers in my bank account have suddenly changed, you see a future for us? Tiffany, seeing her Pair C reservations and 9-figure deal lifestyle evaporating before her eyes, chimed in. He loves you, Danielle. He always has. He told me he made a terrible mistake. Danielle finally looked at the younger woman, seeing not a rival but a sad, desperate reflection of what she herself had almost become. A woman whose entire value was tied to a man's net worth. And I'm sure you believe that, Danielle said, her voice devoid of malice, only a profound weariness. Mr. Abernathy stepped forward, placing himself between Danielle and the desperate couple. I believe it's time for you to leave, Mr. Davenport. A sleek black town car, a Bentley Mulsanne, had pulled up silently to the curb outside. A driver in a dark suit stood by the open rear door. Ms. Caroline has a very busy schedule ahead of her. Richard looked from the car to Danielle to the imposing figure of the lawyer. The fight went out of him, replaced by a cold, simmering hatred. You'll regret this, Danielle, he hissed. You'll come crawling back to me when you've run that company into the ground. With a final venomous glare, he turned and stormed out of the bookstore, dragging a shell-shocked Tiffany behind him. The bell above the door chimed their exit. The silence they left behind was vast and deep. Danielle looked at Mr. Abernathy, her mind still reeling. Sterling Holdings. I don't know the first thing about shipping lines or pharmaceuticals. Arthur knew that, Abernathy said calmly. He didn't leave you a well-oiled machine, Ms. Caroline. He left you a kingdom, and a kingdom comes with its own court, its own advisors, and its own vipers. Your first board meeting is scheduled for 9 a.m. tomorrow morning at Sterling Tower on 5th Avenue. It's time to meet your subjects. He gestured towards the waiting Bentley. Your life as Danielle Caroline, bookstore clerk, is over. Your life as the head of the Sterling Empire begins now. As Danielle walked out of the bookstore for the last time, leaving her apron on the counter, she clutched her great-uncle's letter in her hand. The world outside seemed different, the colors sharper, the sounds of the city more distinct. It was the same street, the same city, but she was seeing it through new eyes. The eyes of a woman who had just inherited the tectonic plates. The journey to the penthouse suite at the Pierre Hotel, where Mr. Abernathy had arranged for her to stay, was a blur. Danielle sat on plush leather seats, staring unseeingly at the New York City skyline as the Bentley glided through traffic with an almost magical ease. The letter from her great-uncle felt warm in her hand, a tangible link to the ghost who had just reshaped her universe. She opened it. The handwriting was surprisingly clear for a man in his 90s. My dearest Danielle, if you are reading this, then I have failed in my quest for immortality, and you have become insufferably wealthy. Do not mourn me. 94 years is a respectable run. Instead, listen closely. I have left you my life's work, not as a reward, but as a burden. It is a magnificent, terrible thing, this empire. It is filled with brilliant minds and soulless predators, with limitless potential and the constant threat of corruption. I have watched you from afar. I saw you pour your soul into that feckless husband of yours, only to be discarded when he thought you were no longer useful. He was a fool. He saw a teacup. I saw a reservoir. I have given you the keys to the kingdom, but I have not left you the crown. You must forge that yourself. The board will test you. They will see you as a temporary inconvenience, a legal curiosity to be managed and then sidelined. Do not let them. Trust no one, especially not those who offer their loyalty too quickly. Your greatest weapon will not be the name Sterling, but the mind of Danielle Caroline. The one they all underestimated. Prove them wrong. Your uncle, Arthur. By the time she finished reading, tears were streaming down her face. They weren't tears of sadness for the man she never knew, but tears of validation. Someone had seen her. Someone had valued her. The next morning, dressed in a simple but elegant navy blue suit provided by a personal shopper who had appeared at her suite like a fairy godmother, Danielle was escorted into the lion's den. Sterling Tower was a monument of black glass and steel, a silent, imposing monolith that scraped the sky. The boardroom was on the 80th floor, offering a panoramic view of the city that made her feel like she was on top of the world and simultaneously on the edge of a cliff. The room was vast and cold, dominated by a single, colossal slab of polished mahogany. Seated around it were the 12 members of the board of Sterling Holdings. They were a collection of old-world power and new-world ruthlessness. There was Bartholomew Cromwell, the COO, a formidable man with a bulldog face and a reputation for corporate savagery. There was Genevieve Dubois, head of the European division, chic and sharp, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. And there was a dozen others, men and women who collectively controlled a significant portion of the global economy. They all rose politely as she entered with Mr. Abernathy, but their eyes were cold, appraising. They looked at her as if she were an exotic and possibly dangerous animal that had wandered into their habitat. Mr. Abernathy made the introductions and formally read the section of the will confirming her inheritance of Arthur's title as chairman of the board. A tense, suffocating silence followed. It was Cromwell who spoke first, his voice a low rumble. Ms. Caroline, welcome. On behalf of the board, I offer our condolences on the passing of your great-uncle. Arthur was a visionary. The word was delivered with a strained formality. However, we find ourselves in an unprecedented situation. You are now the majority shareholder and, by extension, our chairman. Yet, with all due respect, your resume appears to be limited. Most recently, a clerk at a bookstore? The question hung in the air, a blatant challenge. The other board members watched, their faces impassive masks. This was the first test. Danielle's heart hammered against her ribs, but she remembered Arthur's words. Prove them wrong. She met Cromwell's gaze directly, her voice calm and steady, betraying none of the terror she felt. That's correct, Mr. Cromwell, she said. For the past 3 years, I've worked at the Gilded Page. Before that, I spent 12 years as an unofficial and unpaid consultant for a tech startup, helping to develop its initial business strategy, secure seed funding, and build its public profile. The company was called Davenport Innovations. Perhaps you've heard of it. A flicker of surprise registered in a few of the board members' eyes. Cromwell's expression didn't change, but his posture stiffened slightly. I also hold a dual degree in art history and business administration from Columbia, Danielle continued, pressing her small advantage. Art history teaches you to see the details others miss, to understand context, and to recognize authenticity from a forgery. I believe those skills will be quite useful here. Genevieve Dubois laughed, a light musical sound. A charming sentiment, Miss Caroline. But this is not a museum. We are navigating billion-dollar acquisitions and hostile market forces, not debating the provenance of a Rembrandt. The principle is the same, Miss Dubois, Danielle countered smoothly. You look at a company, I look at a painting. We're both trying to determine its true value, identify its weaknesses, and decide whether it's worth the investment. A long silence stretched. She had held her own. She hadn't flinched. Mr. Abernathy gave a nearly imperceptible nod of approval, but Cromwell was not so easily swayed. Very well, he said, opening a folder in front of him. Let's move on to the current agenda. First, the liquidation of the Ethelgard project. It's a failing subsidiary, a passion project of Arthur's that has been hemorrhaging money for 5 years. It's a green energy initiative developing atmospheric water, harvesting technology. The science is unstable. The market is non-existent. It's a $700 million drain on our resources. The board voted unanimously last month to dissolve it. Arthur was the only holdout. With his passing, we can finally move forward. All we need is your signature, as chairman, to authorize the liquidation. He slid a document across the table. It was her first official act, an execution. $700 million. A whole company, gone with a flick of her pen. She remembered Arthur's letter again. Trust no one. This felt too easy, too neat. Before I sign anything, Danielle said, I'd like to see the project for myself. I want all the files, the research, the financial reports, everything, sent to my office. And I want to visit the facility. Cromwell's jaw tightened. Ms. Carolyn, that is highly unorthodox and frankly, a waste of time. The numbers speak for themselves. The project is a failure. Nonetheless, Danielle said, her voice firm, I will not sign a death warrant for a $700 million company without understanding what it is I'm killing. The liquidation is on hold until I complete my review. She stood up, her legs shaking slightly. Thank you for your time, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Abernathy will forward you my agenda for our next meeting. I trust you will all make yourselves available. Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked out of the boardroom, her back straight, her head held high. She didn't look back, but she could feel their collective stare, a physical weight of shock and fury. The game had begun. She had refused to be their puppet, and in doing so, had made a room full of powerful enemies. As the elevator doors closed, she finally allowed herself to exhale, leaning against the cool marble wall. She had survived the first battle, but she knew the war for the Sterling Empire had just begun. The Ethelgard project was located in a remote, windswept corner of the New Mexico desert. Sterling Holdings had provided a private jet, a sleek Gulfstream G650 for the journey. As Danielle soared through the clouds, surrounded by polished walnut and cream leather, she felt a profound sense of dislocation. Less than a week ago, her biggest concern had been a late shipment of paperbacks. Now she was on her way to inspect a subsidiary that was losing more money in a month than she could have earned in 1,000 lifetimes. The facility was not the sterile, glass and steel laboratory she had imagined. It was a sprawling campus of low-slung, sand-colored buildings and massive, strange-looking arrays of what looked like giant metal nets. It was run by a skeleton crew of true believers, scientists, and engineers who had been handpicked by Arthur Sterling himself. Their leader was a woman named Dr. Eris Thorne, a brilliant, fiercely passionate climatologist in her late 40s, with sun-bleached hair and eyes that burned with an intensity that bordered on fanaticism. She greeted Danielle not with the deference one would show the new owner, but with a weary, defiant hostility. So, Dr. Thorne said, forgoing any pleasantries as she led Danielle through a humming laboratory, Cromwell sent the new boss to watch us pack our bags. Did he tell you to offer us a severance package, or just have security escort us off the property? Mr. Cromwell told me the project was a failure, Danielle replied, ignoring the woman's abrasive tone. He wants me to sign off on its liquidation. I came here to find out why I shouldn't. The scientist stopped and turned, her cynical expression softening for the first time into one of grudging respect. He didn't mention that part. All right, let me show you what we're really doing here. For the next 8 hours, Dr. Thorne gave Danielle a crash course in atmospheric water harvesting. It wasn't about simply pulling moisture from the air. The Ethelgard project, she explained, was on the verge of a breakthrough in molecular hydroattraction. It was a technology that could, in theory, create rain. Not just in humid environments, but in the most arid places on Earth. It could turn deserts into farmland, end droughts, and reshape the geopolitical landscape. Your great-uncle didn't see this as a business, Dr. Thorne explained, her voice ringing with conviction. He saw it as a legacy, a way to fix the world. But the technology is expensive, and our progress has been slower than anticipated. The prototypes are inefficient. We can generate dew, we can create mist, but we can't make it rain. Not yet. Cromwell and the board only see the balance sheet. They see an expense. Arthur saw the future. As Danielle reviewed the data, a different picture began to emerge from the one Cromwell had painted. Yes, the project was over budget and behind schedule, but the research was sound, the team was brilliant, and they were achingly close to a breakthrough. The financial reports, however, were a mess. There were inexplicable expenses, third-party consulting fees to shell corporations she'd never heard of, and equipment purchases from suppliers at wildly inflated prices. It didn't look like a failing project. It looked like a project that was being deliberately sabotaged from within. These suppliers, Danielle asked, pointing to a line item in a thick binder. Axiom Materials? Their invoices are triple the market rate for the same components. Dr. Thorne shrugged. That's all handled by the corporate office in New York. Cromwell's people. They manage our procurement. We requisition, they supply. We've complained for years about the quality and the cost, but we were always told to just focus on the science. A cold realization dawned on Danielle. Cromwell wasn't just trying to cut a failing project. He was the one making it fail. He was siphoning money from Ethelgard, bloating its expenses to make it look like a financial black hole, all so he could convince the board to liquidate it. The question was why. That evening, back in her hotel suite, Danielle made a call to a private investigator Mr. Abernathy had recommended, a discreet and ruthlessly efficient man named Peterson. I want you to dig into Bartholomew Cromwell, she said, in a company called Axiom Materials. I want to know everything. While she waited, the news of her inheritance and Richard's very public humiliation had become the talk of the town. The tabloids were having a field day, dubbing her the Billionaire barista. Pictures of her old bookstore were splashed next to paparazzi shots of her entering Sterling Tower. And then, the story took a new turn. Richard Davenport had gone on the offensive. He gave an exclusive interview to Forbes, painting a picture of Danielle as a fragile, simple woman, completely unprepared for the world she'd been thrown into. I love Danielle, I truly do, he said, his face a mask of feigned concern. And that's why I'm so worried. Sterling Holdings is a complex predatory environment. She's a lamb surrounded by wolves. I fear the board will take advantage of her, run the company into the ground, and tarnish the Sterling legacy. I'm speaking out because I feel a sense of duty to protect her and the company she now represents, even if she won't let me. It was a masterful piece of manipulation. He was positioning himself as the noble, concerned ex-husband, while simultaneously seeding the idea in the public and financial markets that Danielle was incompetent. His stock, which had taken a slight dip after the news broke, began to rally. The board was furious about her trip to New Mexico. Cromwell called an emergency meeting via video conference. This is an outrage, Miss Caroline, he thundered from the screen. You are undermining the board's authority and wasting valuable time on a dead-end project. You were brought here to be a figurehead, a caretaker, not to play at being a CEO. I am not playing, Mr. Cromwell, Danielle said, her voice like ice. I am the chairman of this board, and I have discovered rampant financial mismanagement in the Ethelgard project's procurement chain, all of which seems to be managed directly by your office. Can you explain why we are paying a company called Axiom Materials 300% above market value for basic components? The blood drained from Cromwell's face. The other board members shifted uncomfortably. She had just accused the most powerful man in the room of corruption. That is a baseless and insulting accusation, Cromwell snarled. Axiom is a specialized supplier. I'm sure they are, Danielle cut in. I look forward to hearing all about their specializations once I've received the results of the independent forensic audit I have just commissioned into Ethelgard's finances for the last 5 years. She ended the call, leaving a stunned and silent board of directors staring at a blank screen. The lines had been drawn. This wasn't just about liquidating a project anymore. It was a fight for control. Cromwell had tried to hand her a poisoned chalice, expecting her to drink it down without question. But Danielle had just smashed it on the floor, and she was ready to use the shards as a weapon. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of trench warfare. The forensic audit was a slow, painstaking process, and Cromwell and his allies on the board fought her at every turn, burying her in procedural red tape and mountains of irrelevant paperwork. They treated her with open contempt in meetings, condescendingly explaining basic financial concepts to her, hoping to fluster and humiliate her into submission. But they were making the same mistake Richard had. They underestimated her. Danielle worked 18-hour days. She transformed a spare bedroom in her penthouse into a war room, its walls covered in charts and diagrams. She devoured every file on Ethelgard, every financial report, every piece of research. She didn't just read them, she absorbed them. She found a quiet thrill in untangling the complex knots of data, the same thrill she used to get from tracing the provenance of a lost painting. She poured her own money, a concept that was still staggering to her, into the Ethelgard project, bypassing Cromwell's corrupted procurement channels and providing Dr. Thorne's team with the equipment they actually needed. She set up a direct line of communication with Dr. Thorne, and they spoke daily, a bond of mutual respect forming between the two women. Meanwhile, her investigator, Peterson, was digging. He was a ghost, leaving no trace but delivering explosive information in discreet manila envelopes. The first report confirmed her suspicions. Axiom Materials was a shell corporation, and its ownership was traced through a labyrinth of offshore accounts that eventually led back to Bartholomew Cromwell's brother-in-law. Cromwell had been systematically bleeding Ethelgard dry for years, but Peterson's second report was the real bombshell. Cromwell wasn't just stealing, he was planning a coup. He had been secretly meeting with a consortium of investors from a rival conglomerate, a ruthless entity known as Vanguard Global. The plan was simple. Cromwell would use his influence to devalue Sterling Holdings stock by making it appear unstable and poorly managed under its inexperienced new chairman. He would use the public failure of Ethelgard as the final nail in the coffin. Once the stock price had fallen enough, Vanguard would initiate a hostile takeover, and Cromwell would be installed as their puppet CEO. Richard, she realized, was an unwitting pawn in this game. His public campaign to paint her as incompetent was playing directly into Cromwell's hands, making the company seem weak and vulnerable. Danielle now understood the true stakes. This wasn't just about saving one project or ousting one corrupt executive. It was about saving the entire Sterling Empire from being devoured. She needed allies. Reviewing Arthur's private notes, which Mr. Abernathy had given her, she found mention of a man named David Chen, a brilliant but disgraced former board member who Arthur had fired 5 years prior for his reckless optimism. Chen had been the original champion of the Ethelgard project alongside Arthur. He had been forced out by Cromwell, who had framed him for a failed investment. Danielle found David Chen running a small, independent consulting firm. He was wary at first, but when Danielle laid out everything she had found, Cromwell's corruption, the Vanguard plot, her belief in Ethelgard, his eyes lit up with a fire she imagined had been dormant for years. "I knew it," he said, pacing his small office. "Cromwell always hated Arthur's vision. He called it philanthropic nonsense. He's a corporate parasite, content to bleed a company dry for short-term gains. He has no vision." "Help me, David," Danielle said. "Help me save it. I can't do this alone." With David Chen as her secret advisor, Danielle started to change her tactics. She was no longer just defending, she was attacking. Following his guidance, she began using her authority as chairman to initiate quiet investigations into other divisions managed by Cromwell's allies. She started asking pointed questions in board meetings, questions armed with data provided by Chen that made the guilty parties squirm. The tide was slowly beginning to turn. A few of the more neutral board members, smelling blood in the water and fearing the instability Cromwell was creating, began to distance themselves from him. Geneviève Dubois, the sharp Frenchwoman, requested a private meeting. "I do not like Cromwell," she said bluntly, sipping an espresso in Danielle's suite. "He is a brute, but he is a predictable brute. You, Miss Caroline, are an unknown quantity. I am not your enemy, but I am not yet your friend. I am a pragmatist. Show me you can win, and you will have my support." Danielle knew she needed a decisive victory, and it came from the most unexpected of places. One evening, she received a frantic, excited call from Dr. Thorne in New Mexico. "We did it." The scientist's voice was choked with emotion. "My God, Danielle, we did it. The new focusing arrays you sent us, they worked. We modified the energy matrix and it's raining. It's raining in the middle of the desert." Danielle felt a thrill shoot through her. This was it. This was the weapon she needed. "Keep it quiet, Eris," Danielle instructed, her mind already racing, formulating a plan. "Don't file a report. Don't tell anyone. Let Cromwell and the world continue to believe that Ethelgard is nothing but a $700 million hole in the ground." The final piece of the puzzle came from Peterson, a report detailing Richard's precarious financial situation. Davenport Innovations, despite the Kestrel deal, was massively over-leveraged. Richard had bet everything on a new product launch that was failing, and he was days away from defaulting on a major loan. The Kestrel deal itself was funded by a subsidiary of Sterling Holdings. With a single phone call, Danielle could pull his funding and bankrupt him. She now held the strings to both her ex-husband's and her greatest enemy's fates. The time for defense was over. It was time to set the trap. Danielle called a special board meeting. The official reason was to announce the final, definitive liquidation of the Ethelgard project. Cromwell arrived like a conquering hero, a smug, triumphant smile plastered on his face. He believed he had won, that the naive bookstore clerk had finally succumbed to the inevitable. His allies on the board mirrored his confidence. "I'm glad you finally come to your senses, Miss Caroline," Cromwell began, barely hiding his glee. "It's time to cut our losses and move on to more profitable ventures." "You're absolutely right, Mr. Cromwell," Danielle said, her voice eerily calm. "It is time to cut our losses." She gestured to the large screen at the end of the boardroom. "But before we sign the paperwork, I thought it would be fitting to show a live feed from the Ethelgard facility. A final look at the project we are about to dismantle." An image flickered onto the screen. It showed the New Mexico desert under a dark, cloudy sky. And then the board saw it. Rain. Not a drizzle, but a steady, soaking downpour, turning the dusty ground dark and forming puddles around the strange metal arrays. A collective gasp went through the room. Cromwell shot to his feet, his face a mask of disbelief. "What is this? This is impossible. It's a trick. It's doctored footage." "It's quite real, I assure you," Danielle said, her voice ringing with newfound authority. "Dr. Thorne and her team had a breakthrough. It seems the project wasn't a failure after all. It was merely underfunded and mismanaged." She let that sink in before she delivered the next blow. "It's a shame the board was so misinformed about its potential. A shame that the financial reports were deliberately falsified to show bloated expenses and hide its progress." She pressed a button, and the screen switched to a series of spreadsheets and bank records. The name Axiom Materials appeared, along with a complex web of transactions leading directly to Cromwell's brother-in-law. "The results of the forensic audit I commissioned," Danielle announced to the stunned room. "It appears Mr. Cromwell has embezzled over $90 million from this company over the past 5 years, routing the funds through a shell corporation. He wasn't just trying to kill a project he disliked, he was covering his tracks." Cromwell was ashen, speechless. His allies looked at him with horror, realizing the abyss he had dragged them to. "But it gets worse," Danielle continued, her voice like steel, "because this wasn't just about theft, it was about treason." The screen changed again, this time showing grainy surveillance photos. Cromwell meeting with the board of Vanguard Global, transcripts of phone calls, a detailed outline of the hostile takeover plot. "Mr. Cromwell wasn't just stealing from Sterling Holdings," Danielle declared. "He was planning to sell it to our biggest rival. He has been actively working to devalue our stock to make us vulnerable. His actions constitute a flagrant breach of his fiduciary duty." The boardroom was in chaos. Cromwell was sputtering, denying everything, but the evidence was overwhelming. Danielle held up a hand, and silence fell. "Mr. Cromwell, you are fired, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. I suggest you find a very good lawyer. The SEC and the District Attorney's Office will be receiving a copy of this entire file within the hour." 2 stern-faced security guards entered the room and approached Cromwell, who collapsed into his chair, a broken man. Danielle then turned her attention to the rest of the board. "The rest of you have a choice. You can be loyal to the man who just tried to sell your company, or you can be loyal to the name on the building. I am calling for a vote of no confidence in every board member who voted to liquidate Ethelgard without due diligence. David Chen will be taking Mr. Cromwell's place as COO. There are other vacancies to fill. You have 24 hours to tender your resignations and negotiate a severance. If you refuse, I will have every department you manage audited with the same scrutiny I gave Ethelgard. I wonder what I'll find." Fear and self-preservation replaced their arrogance. Genevieve Dubois was the first to speak. "I believe a resignation would be in order," she said, looking directly at Danielle with a newfound, profound respect. "And may I be the first to say, congratulations, Madam Chairman." One by one, Cromwell's allies crumbled. The kingdom was hers. But there was one loose end to tie up. That evening, Richard Davenport sat in his gleaming, minimalist office, staring at a notice of default from his bank. His company was unraveling. The Kestrel deal was his only lifeline. His private line rang. It was Danielle. "Danielle!" he exclaimed, a desperate hope in his voice. "Thank God! I heard what happened with Cromwell. It's monstrous. I knew something was wrong. Listen, we need to talk. I need your help." "Hello, Richard," she said, her voice calm and distant, as if she were speaking from a great height. "I'm calling about the Kestrel deal. I've been reviewing the financing. It was approved by a sterling subsidiary under Cromwell's authority. Given the circumstances, I've decided to pull the funding." Richard's world stopped. "What? No. Danielle, you can't. That will ruin me. Everything I've built, it will be gone." "Yes," she said, "it will. Why are you doing this?" he screamed into the phone. "Is this revenge? After everything, you're going to destroy me out of spite." "This isn't spite, Richard," Danielle said, and for the first time he heard the chilling, absolute power in her voice. "This isn't even personal. It's just business. The deal is over-leveraged, your company is unstable, and you are a bad investment. It's the kind of ruthless, logical decision you always claim to admire." She paused. "You built a pathetic little hill and called it a mountain, remember? I'm just here to remind you what the tectonic plates feel like when they shift." She hung up the phone, the connection severed. In his multi-million-dollar office overlooking the city, Richard Davenport stared into the abyss of his own making, a king of nothing, finally and completely destroyed not by anger, but by a simple, cold business calculation. 3 months later, the name Danielle Caroline was no longer tabloid fodder. It was spoken with a mixture of awe and fear in the most powerful boardrooms in the world. The billionaire barista was gone, replaced by the sterling architect, a nickname coined by the Wall Street Journal after she had not only saved the company, but restructured it with terrifying efficiency. She had cleaned house. The old board was gone, replaced by a new generation of innovators, loyalists, and visionaries, led by the fiercely dedicated David Chen. Genevieve Dubois had surprisingly been one of the few to survive the purge. After offering her unconditional support and providing key evidence against Cromwell's remaining allies, she had proven her pragmatism was an asset Danielle could use. The Ethelgard project, now renamed Project Oasis, was the crown jewel of the new Sterling Holdings. With a massive infusion of capital and resources, Dr. Thorne's team had stabilized the technology. They had successfully induced rainfall over a 1,000-acre test site in Arizona, and governments from around the world were now engaged in a frantic bidding war for their rights. What Cromwell had seen as a liability, Danielle had turned into the most valuable and world-changing technology of the 21st century. Sterling Holdings wasn't just a conglomerate anymore. It was shaping the future of the planet. Davenport Innovations had collapsed, as she knew it would. It was bought for pennies on the dollar by a bottom-feeding competitor. The last Danielle had heard, Richard was facing multiple lawsuits from his shareholders and had been forced to sell the penthouse and all his assets. Tiffany had left him the moment the money ran out. Her diamond necklace likely sold to pay her legal fees from a messy palimony suit. Danielle felt nothing watching his downfall. No pleasure, no satisfaction, just a quiet, final closing of a chapter she had long since finished reading. Her life now was one of disciplined purpose. She rose before the sun, her days a whirlwind of meetings, data analysis, and decisions that affected thousands of lives and billions of dollars. She moved into Arthur's Fifth Avenue penthouse, a magnificent but lonely space filled with priceless art. But she had changed it. She brought in light and warmth, replacing heavy draperies with open windows. And in the center of the Grand Library, where Arthur had once managed his empire in solitude, she placed her most prized possession, a small, framed photograph of the staff and regulars at the Gilded Page. She had bought the entire city block, not as a show of power, but to preserve the bookstore, turning it into a foundation-funded literacy center for the community. One crisp autumn evening, she stood on the terrace of her penthouse, looking out over the glittering expanse of New York City. The city lights twinkled below like a fallen constellation. She held a glass of water, simple, clean, and pure. It was the most valuable commodity in the world, and she was the one who could now command the clouds to deliver it. Mr. Abernathy, who had remained her most trusted advisor and a genuine friend, stood beside her. "Arthur would be proud," he said quietly. "You didn't just take the crown, Danielle. You redefined what it means to wear it." "He told me he saw a reservoir," Danielle replied, a small smile touching her lips. "I don't think he knew how right he was. Richard thought my biggest weakness was that I cared too much. He thought compassion was a liability in business." "And now?" Abernathy asked. "Now," she said, watching the endless stream of headlights moving along the streets below, "I know it's the ultimate currency. Cromwell and Richard wanted to build empires of money and ego. They built on sand. We're building something that will last. We're building a legacy." She was no longer Danielle Caroline, the heartbroken ex-wife. She was not even Danielle Sterling, the heir. She was simply Danielle, a woman who had been pushed to the very edge of her life only to discover a universe of strength within herself. She had faced down the vipers in her own court, vanquished the ghosts of her past, and emerged not as a queen who had inherited a throne, but as an architect who was now designing a better world. The tectonic plates had shifted, and she was the one moving them. And there you have it, the incredible story of how one woman's worst day became the first day of her new empire. It's a powerful reminder that our true worth is never defined by how others see us, but by the strength and integrity we find within ourselves when we are tested. Danielle's journey from a humble bookstore to the pinnacle of global power shows that the greatest victories often come right after our most painful defeats. What did you think of Danielle's ultimate triumph? Could you feel the shift in power when she finally confronted her enemies? Let me know in the comments below. If you were moved by this story of justice and empowerment, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own strength, and be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next story. Thanks for listening.